So we gathered again to do another sculpture forum, and we've been to see the retrospective show of work by Rachael Harrison at the Whitney Museum, and we're looking at images from that show, and we're going to be talking about our experience in the show. I'm here with
Brandt Junceau, sculptor.
Rachael Bohlander, sculptor, mixed media.
Jock, Ireland, sculptor.
and Maud is behind the camera and the microphone. So I really don't want to begin this discussion, if you don't mind. Would somebody else please start?
Okay. I'll start. I've had a lot of difficulty with the show, but I've been reading Mark Morris's memoir, choreographer and dancer, and he's got this memoir out, and in the course of a woman named Tina Fallon danced for Mark Morris in the 80s and 90s, maybe into the aughts. And in the memoir, there's a brief thing about Tina and her 30th birthday party. She invited all of her ex-boyfriends to this birthday party, and but at the party she slapped all of the boyfriends across the face, and sort of that's the story. I don't know whether she slapped them hard, whether maybe she missed, what. But that sense of getting a slap in the face is sort of the beginning of my response to this show, and I sort of took this thinking a little further and wondered about Rachel's boyfriends. Who were they? Who was she slapping in the face? And one of the boyfriends that I thought of was our friend, or the friend of many of us here, Bill Tucker. And I'm not talking about literal boyfriends, but I do see a lot of Bill's lumpy sculpture in the sort of styrofoam lumps in Rachel's work. And yet there are big differences. And I wonder, literally, did she, I think she sort of came of age in the 90s, or began showing in the 90s, and maybe that stretch of time was when Bill was at his lumpiest. And did she see his work? Is this some kind of response to it? Is it a response to his book? Did she even read his book? There's certainly nothing I've read about Rachael that indicates any kind of connection with Tucker. But that's, in a way, not surprising. But I wonder about that, and I don't wonder about it in a kind of scholarly way, but I just trying to connect and disconnect the two sort of takes on sculpture. Her work is very different in spirit to Bill's, and that's allowed me anyway to come to grips to some extent. Certainly I haven't come to any, I don't have a 25-word or less response to her show, but this break between her work and a lot of the work that's been made since she the beginning of the 90s is very different from the studio school work that or tradition, if you like, that I come out of. And that disconnect is was interesting to me.
Okay. Rachel.
So this was the third time that I went to go see it, and I agree with Jock that the first time I went in, I really had gone in on a recommendation from one of my instructors at the studio school to look at how she was painting her polystyrene and cement boulders. It was kind of what I think of them. And I walked in and it was, wow, mind blown. And there was just so much to take in. It really was sort of overwhelming. But I think of it as almost like a movie that the first time you watch it, you're paying attention to what the characters are saying, the major plot lines, and you get it and you're like, that's a good movie. And then you go back and you watch it again and you start seeing what like side characters are doing, or you hear little side comments and you start to complete the picture. And I think what's very important about her work is it really does need to be seen as a whole, and you have to take it all in. But the first time you go in, it is sensory overload. You're not going to be able to do it. It's something that not only requires careful looking, but I do think needs to be revisited. Because it is difficult, and she's got a wicked sense of humor, and sometimes I get what she's doing and other times, I don't, but I'm not sure she cares, and I'm not sure if she cares that we all get out of it the same thing. That there was the sculpture that she named after Al Gore that had a thermostat attached to the side of it, and I got a good chuckle out of that because he had a reputation of being something as a block, and this particular sculpture was kind of a big cylindrical rectangle, and he was one of the first politicians to really stress climate change, particularly in a presidential campaign, and that's how I got like thermostat. So I thought that was sort of funny. Is somebody else going to get the same thing? Don't know.
So I feel like I'm kind of putting together the two viewpoints so far. My own take kind of does that. I had this sense, the overall sense, like of taking it's a career retrospective and you're seeing so much work at once over a span of time. So you get kind of a big picture, and I thought that maybe an essential character of this artist, this work, is a critic, and also equally almost a kind of a monastic, formal studio artist, like say Brandt. Although there's, almost every work depends on some kind of found object, and of course that's the antithesis of the practice of a guy like Brandt. But I really felt such strong presence and attention to history. I felt this strong bounce from early modernism, and in the drawings, which I was really knocked out by, I thought, well, this is really, you can put two things together, the Picasso 347 suite and, publicly available images of Amy Winehouse, and here, that's the drawings. Like those two things together. And I thought, Jesus, what a bounce on those etchings. It has this critical perspective toward them, reveals things that you can't possibly ignore or rephrase the same way again. At the same time, it's such an intimate embrace, and a really, kind of an uncritical embrace in a sense that formally it's a total embrace, and the critique develops in the course of working. It's not at all, a matter of simple conjunctions and putting together found items. It's something essential and characteristic and utterly plastic. And I thought to myself, Jesus, if I were drawing like this, I'd find it hard to take the time to make an object. And the things are chromatic too, which is like, I mean, the 347 suite, of course, is black and white. But I was very impressed. Another funny thing I noticed, like in the very first works you see by, the younger artists, they really seemed kind of essential to me. As I've noticed in the work of other very strong artists, it's like you see this germ immediately, and then it develops in some fashion or another, or not, but it's all there. And I thought, that's true here, and it's so formal. So overall, I found it greatly encouraging in the sense of contemporaneity and of a utterly fresh development of the best of modernism, even early modernism. And the connection to Tucker is interesting that you make, because there is a certain, it's almost like a dichotomous contrast between this kind of lumpen monolith or things that are fashioned into a monolith by a coating. The first thing I thought of was John Miller, that's sort of making a single form out of something by reducing it to a kind of a paste, a conceptual paste. In his case, the metaphor is, it's brown shit. With her, it's chromatic and, it's lighter on its feet, more various. And then there's a funny, kind of conversation between that monolith and the found items.
Well, I think you've covered it all. I don't think I need to say anything. I'm going to have to play devil's advocate here. I'm not sure where to begin. I did not have the same response to this exhibition that didn't feel like a slap in the face. I think that would have been invigorating and not welcome, but at least it would have been a surprise. It seemed to me that there were some early works that I found seemed to be personal and to have a kind of intimacy with the author speaking to herself and at the same time speaking to the larger culture and commenting in a witty way. The overall sense I had was of a kind of saccharine, claim to a kind of wit, intelligence, and playfulness. And somehow or other, I found myself, I agree with about the drawings. I thought they were amongst the strongest works in the show. After the early work, I began to feel that it was formulaic, the objects. I welcomed the sense that she was making, freestanding objects, and not simply scattering stuff around. But I found them to begin to feel quite formulaic, in the sense that the structures were predictable. The relationship of parts was predictable. The general organization of them was predictable. The sense of there was a strategy of combining, a large, colorful lump or some rough structure with found objects, and often I could not find a meaningful connection between the 2 or 3 or 4 things that were put together. Indeed, it seemed sometimes as if the point was the absence of a connection. I could simply be missing a lot of references to pop culture and other historical facts that that I'm not up to, and that could be my failing. But even if that were the case, even if that is the case, and I strongly suspect that in terms of popular culture that is the case, I didn't find that what was being kind of addressed was being addressed in a way that felt had a real kind of urgency. There was a claim to a kind of urgency in the way things are roughly made and roughly put together, as if there's a kind of a claim to a kind of spontaneity and a need to do it quickly and a need to get it out there. But somehow or other, I, for the life of me, I could not honestly say that it mattered to me. This may be completely my feeling.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd like to be more generous. I mean, because I think there is a lot of, there's a lot to commend the work. It is. There is a lot of it. It's energetic. It's colourful. It can be seen as playful. It can be seen as witty. It can be seen. I mean, I hear what everybody's saying about it. But I, in the end, I didn't think it had a bite.
I think sort of before 1990, and certainly all that I've learned with my many years in school, the emphasis has been on how to make a drawing, painting, or sculpture, and not what you were saying, just how you say whatever it is you have to say. And it seems to me that what Harrison is focusing on and is breaking with is sort of slapping the face of this attitude that how you make something matters, the sort of language you use. She's saying that doesn't matter, and what you say matters. And that emphasis, or that change, is something that or at least I'm guessing you're having trouble connecting with. It's certainly something that I have trouble connecting with. And it's a lot, because this kind of break that I'm trying to describe has resulted in work like Rachael's, but it's also resulted in a lot of simplistic political art with simplistic messages. The Richard Serra print or drawing or something that he wrote, "Stop Bush," a very simple political message from a very sort of formalist guy, or how to use the language guy. But it's interesting to me how complicated and sort of overwhelmingly complicated, confusing Rachael's work is in terms of what it is she's trying to say. She doesn't care about how she's saying it, but her message is, interestingly, very complex. The sort of pencil on paper drawings, I think she gets into a lot of trouble, sort of interesting trouble, because she doesn't know how to draw. She hasn't had any background, and she's rejected how to draw. All she does is bring in or point to Picasso or Amy Winehouse and jam them together. And she jams them together in a way that ends up with a sort of complicated, overwhelmingly complicated, I think, confused message. But I'm trying to be clear about this.
Yeah, no, I mean, those socks we were just looking at in the very first room were the only, well, not the only things, but one of the things that I felt touched by. I felt something very real happened there, and it happened for me. I mean, just in terms of them being, something both kind of very familiar and very personal and very intimate, and in some way presented in a way that was totally surprising and formally interesting. I mean, I take it what you say, Jock, about not about process but about trying to say something, and being concerned with what it is you're saying, less than about how you're saying it. one of the things that kind of I found myself beginning to be frustrated by was the extent to which the work depended on signs. That in each work there were a series of things which were just simple signs, which I don't mean literally signs, but that signifies, things that pointed you at something, nameable things, familiar things, combined with these what seemed to be fairly kind of roughly put together structures or lumps that didn't that for all that they were fingered and daubed and coloured, they didn't have, for me, they didn't have a sense of their own making. They didn't convey to me a sense of what the person making them was doing. Like it did. Again, I must be missing something.
Well, I think that she's from a world where instead of teaching skills, when you go to most art schools now, you are taught de-skilling. I'm unfairly oversimplifying the situation, but she is emphatically not about putting things together. Simply putting things together. She's about sticking things together in a way that the way they don't go together comes across most loudly and clearly.
I'm going to have to disagree with some of that. You look at her work, even kind of the more monolithic pieces, I very much get a sense that she is working as she goes, and she picks up a piece and she takes another one. She thinks very hard about how they fit together and builds on it from there, whether it's an internal structure, which I do think the boulders, the polystyrene pieces have, and then the other ones, I wish I could remember. I think the one with the skull was Brownie, was the title, and then there was one nearby, the lime green one. I get a sense that she cared very much about how it was put together, and it was very intentional, and that there are areas of compression, and where you see like the one with the mannequin, she's playing with weight. This is something that volumetrically should be quite heavy, and if you look at the way that it sits on the ground, it's only like a couple little pieces. And you really have to be thinking formalistically to be able to do that. Whether she's been taught not to think that way, something's in there.
Yeah, I double down on understanding this work as very much plastic and very much arrived at plastically. That the signs are crucial, absolutely crucial, and it's interesting to me that you can read them so far that way, as being almost entirely composed of signs. But I feel secure, confident that that I understand this artist is like speaking the language, like the language of sculpture as it's been handed to us, and that these things are arrived at over time and consideration, and that although many of them strike you as like very clean, like that piece that I can't remember the title, Warren Beatty, that's made of these moving blankets. I thought to myself, how can you be confident these things are going to stick together just as they are? It's just right, but like, what is the sticky medium that's keeping this thing in place? But the point being that it really is felt and nudged and pushed into the form it achieves. But she has also, some of this, of the other reading, I think it's deliberately contrived on her part, because she has a way of delivering a kind of contingency that's not to say painted on or applied, but however secure the thing is physically and formally, I don't think she's willing to turn it over to us until this certain level of contingency has asserted itself. That the viewer will have to take it as fragile, as contingent, as kind of provisional as she intended, that it somehow could have gone another way, or that it's tumbled into from things found in the world. Like, that's really essential to her. But I found them very much plastic, very much sculptural.
Well, that is really. I mean, so you kind of were convinced by the sense that what can feel arbitrary or accidental is actually very carefully considered.
Yeah.
And that's at the heart of what she's doing. But how do you connect that with any sense of plastic that is just a sort of empty cliche?
I could, if I felt that the work was continually keeping you on the edge of something, keeping you unsure and guessing, and making you feel, provoking a kind of anxiety or a kind of, need to be alert. I would have, I think, had a very different reaction. I did not feel that. On the contrary, I began to feel the reverse. The more time I spent there, the more I began to feel the work was tired.
Yeah, I guess I did feel tension with it. Not so much, some with the individual pieces, but what I got out of it was seeing all of it as a whole. She did it in kind of the facsimile of a room, when I realized that she had photos of actual sculptures that were hanging in the room. And then suddenly you're looking, there's the picture of what's over here that's real, and then a reflection of that over there. And this thing hanging up here has on the wall a picture of that. And that created a tension and a little bit of anxiety, because it was a little claustrophobic, to be honest, that you had all of these images and the actual item or object as a whole with, say, the middle room. Every one of those pieces and photographs engage with each other, and that's where I found the tension. Whether it was shape or color or the way that the forms stacked up, and sometimes it was very subtle. It might be just a small strip of found, almost like you would get like at a paint store sample, at the top of a board that spoke with the photographs behind it. Sometimes it was, you say, a little more obvious, where different colors within the sculptures bounced off of each other. There was that conversation. And kind of a push-pull between them. And I found the same in the final room as well. Maybe taken as, an individual object or sculpture, you might not get that kind of tension, or, if the keys dropped here, that's a little annoying, but when you take it as the whole, it suddenly starts making sense when you see how it engages and speaks and reflects off of itself.
I want to come back to something that you mentioned, Jock, the kind of like drawing like you don't know how to draw kind of thing, which seems like that could be a great subject for an entire discussion. I happen to have done a lot of thinking at Picasso this fall, I guess it was, and I thought a lot about this trajectory in his work, from masterful to this kind of really deliberate, like finger in your eye. I'm going to draw in like the most impudent, basic, rude way I can. And it seems to me that kind of thing, it goes back to, with Picasso, that's like in, 50s, 60s, 70s. it's already part of our history, and coming from someone who, like Barronson said, could draw like Raphael. And it's yet again another means of, well, I think it has its own emotional, impetus, but it has the side effect of uncovering territory, of releasing more territory to, capital A art in general, just pushing the horizon further to right and left. And then I think that being, granted or entertained, then it's a question of how well it's done. And the artist I was trying to think of yesterday is Rosemary Trakel. There's drawings of hers that have this, that also have a kind of, perhaps deliberately mediated naivete, awkwardness, whatever we call it. And they're early, they're like 80s. So they're kind of like, but for Rachel Harrison to be 90s, like early in her career. They have that similar quality. And I think it can be quite sophisticated. And I think that it lies in like the line of history. I think it's like it belongs to us now. There is that departure and this sort of disorientation and discomfort and tension, but it is like it's part of our world. It's part of our vocabulary now. It's in the language.
Well, if you want to bring in Picasso, I think that room full of patches of wall, that there's
like early Cubism, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Brown and wood grained,
and Rachael described her experience of that the other day, or something. She went looking for cans of peas, and she had to take this trip to find it and that trip to find it. She had to travel through space.
Yeah.
And that, at least, that's sort of what I think of. Certainly that happens in a Picasso or Brock Cubist thing. But the thing is, there's a clarity in the Picasso and the Brocks that is sort of just a mess, less of a mess in that room. But certainly when she sits down with a pencil and paper sort of thing, it's a mess. She's not going anywhere. She's just putting two ideas on one piece of paper sort of thing. And that, that's what a sort of a plastic consciousness means to me, and it's something that she's just not aware of, and she is aware of a sort of textbook definition or itemization of things associated with modern contemporary art, and one of those things is that Picasso, went anti-art toward the end of his life, but he, right until the last minute, he was more plastically aware than, that you don't understand that except by doing it, and that's where she loses me, or she loses me in the drawings, or
in the drawings.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of think of her as a painter. She's trying to be a painter. She seems to be actually interested in putting one color on top of another.
I'm not sure. I mean, I thought there was a real kind of graphic gift in the work on paper that I could get some real involvement with. I thought it was playful and lively, and in some ways, the most coherent. It's not the other work. The sculpture is incoherent. I mean, in some ways, the way in which the sculpture was willfully incoherent, I found got to be tedious.
On kind of the same subject, I thought of how, 30, 40 years ago, there was a lot of advanced criticism, so forth, that pressed for contemporary art to be more about subject than form. And walking through this show, I thought, how much was lost by this? I wondered how many younger artists really thought that they should almost put form aside to do their work. And because here I thought that, form had really spoken. And spoken like in the language of signs and contemporary reference and etc. But it was like plastic. That last piece in the big room alone with the green cord was very spare, quite elegant. And that for me, I thought that really kind of clinches the idea that this work is spatial and composed by doing and looking
and drawing.
Yeah.
That work interested me too. I did think this was one of the more interesting things in the show, and I think perhaps the most recent.
Yes, exactly. 2019.
But I think that my sense of the work, while on the one hand thumbing its nose at the canon and the whole institution, was actually feasting off it at the same time.
Oh yeah.
So I had a very uncomfortable kind of sense of the rotting body.
Well, yeah, but she's
the canon is being used, but not to be added to so much as to somehow to be not even kind of meaningfully deconstructed, but somehow as a poked fun at.
Yeah, slapped in the face. But that's there. I don't know. So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah,
I did not get a slap in the face.
Uh-huh.
If the work had been somehow the more, it did not have a bite. It was saccharine and pretending to something.
Right, a sort of drunken slap in the face.
Not even drunk.
You're doubling down, Jock. I think the slap is kind of it's a fertile metaphor for the conversation, but I think it's in part, that slap is sort of like Rauschenberg erasing the de Kooning drawing.
And it's that kind of thing.
It's done with enormous respect and consideration, and it actually creates continuity.
Well, but it's not done with the kind of respect that Rauschenberg might have pretended to have for de Kooning. Some of the wall labels talk about her, the bicycle, Happy Howler or something. Huffy is. That's supposed to be a horse, it's talking about the 19th century generals on horses, and even the what is it, Warren Beatty or that kind of male phallic kind of thing, but she's not. The thing is that they can put that on the wall label, and I bet it was a Whitney curator putting that on the wall label, not Rachael. And they do that and to sort of dumb it down. It is actually, she's kind of mocking that stuff, but she's also mocking her. I mean, that's an old thing to mock. The whole 20th century sort of got past that general on the horse thing. Mm-hmm. And there's a sort of complexity to her commentary or her and it's a confusion and overload is part of her. Those are the things that she's working with. She's sort of not working with clay. She's working with ideas that contradict themselves and that are old and yet just sort of from today's New York Times.
I would say she's not mocking the canon. I think she embraces it. I agree with Brandt on that. I think she dedicated an entire room to Cubism. She embraces it. I mean, you can see it through her work. What I do think she mocks is, and I think there was even a little kind of blurb about it on the wall, is maybe the museum institution and the gatekeepers, that you can do a formal sculpture and then stick a vacuum cleaner in it and it's still art, that it needs to be considered in all its parts. Like that's, and it maybe is confusing because we're not used to seeing made and ready-made on a pedestal, in a white cube, but I think her point is that, that's where kind of the slap in the face is coming from. That we need to be more expansive, or everything needs to be considered. I do think that is what she's kind of knocking around a bit with, particularly with the last room, that all items need to be considered. And I know that yes, Duchamp and ready-made, and we had Rauschenberg with the combines, but I feel that's where she's going with it, and that she's not, smacking the canon itself or her heritage or legacy around. She's just taking it one step further.
Yeah, she's the vacuum cleaner in the Tucker or whatever, that I get the feeling that I've seen that stand alone. In a gallery, and then she put it in that circle of chairs. That is another sort of fold or another layer of complexity. I'm confused about where it's going, but that's what she's working with, folding sort of layers of irony into her, either a particular piece of sculpture or her show.
And I'm not always convinced it's even supposed to be ironic all the time. Sometimes I think she takes, a piece that she finds lying on the floor, like that purse, and decides that it's just another part that she's piecing together with the made structure. I don't know if I'm right about that, but I think sometimes it just is. Like, there's not more meaning to it. Sometimes I think there is more meaning to it, but that's for us to puzzle out.
No, I think that's a kind of cliche, isn't it, about contemporary art and how, it's for the viewer to somehow or other complete the work. To the extent that these things offered themselves as things to be puzzled over was something that struck me. That why this with that? Why this combination? What is that? Thing hanging there for? Why is this? Why are those keys down there on the floor? That kind of offering the viewer a tantalizing kind of experience of not knowing why something is where it is, or what something is in relation to something else, seems to me to be, a strategy that was prevalent throughout much of the work, and again, I found it. I confess that I probably am missing, the clues that would enable me to follow this trail of breadcrumbs and get some kind of satisfaction from having reached some sort of resolution about what it is that's being said. but mostly I found it annoying.
Yeah, sometimes I don't think there was anything being said. That she used, like I said, the vacuum cleaner. I think she used it because it worked with the maid structure that she had. That I don't.
Well, when you say worked with, what does that mean?
I mean, so, and maybe it's because I work this way. It is a lot of things that sit on the floor and you're piecing them together, and it does it look good or doesn't it look good? Except for instead of taking another board or like the styrofoam, she's like, the vacuum cleaner fits the form that she was looking for, and that's why she added it in. I don't think that's the case all the time. I do think she has a message in some of the work. Sometimes I think she really just does drop keys because she can, and she makes you consider it. You know, is it part of the whole? Does it make it more interesting? And yeah, it's a lot to take in, and I'm not going to say it wasn't occasionally irritating. But on the whole, I really appreciated it and found it to be almost a game's not quite the right word, but I found it really slowed me down and forced me to think about the decisions she made and why, and I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean I think that's not dissimilar to my experience, but I ended up in a different place to you. I think, but I'd like to go back to this. You know, this idea that the vacuum cleaner fit or worked, or but the sense in which it worked was because some kind of connection was being made in terms of the vacuum cleaner as an identifiable object that had a function and a place in the world, and a whole set of cultural associations about who does the vacuuming and so on, and you know that what's conjured by that, rather than a kind of sense in which the colour and the form and the way it articulated space and created tension between itself physically and the thing in which it was relation to. Yeah. It's a different kind of, to do with the kind of what was being signified, rather than how it articulated physically the thing it was in relation to.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I guess for me with that particular piece, I stopped seeing the vacuum cleaner and I saw a shape that in form, something that fit, for lack of a more technical term. I mean, I was no longer having a conversation with myself, like, that's a vacuum cleaner, why is it there? And I mean, she's not always successful with it. There was one other moment where I thought she was, and it was the kind of drugstore rack with the jewelry on it, the photo of Ronald Reagan. But there was a snow shovel that was inside of it, and it was bent, and then there was like a part of the rack was kind of jutting out. And I thought as a whole it worked. It was no longer a shovel to me. It was part of the form.
Plastic integrity.
Exactly.
Yeah. And she mixes and undercuts the plastic integrity with these ideas. And it's really, they're kind of two ways you can look at art, and with a Tucker, you just look at it, and the longer you look, the more you can find, or with a good one. And with the Graham Nixon, I think of Graham as another one of her I thought of him when I saw the photographs of the sunset. But with the Graham sunset, you just look. The question of do you get it or not just doesn't come up. With Rachael, it comes up all the time, but it gets confused. There are moments when it sort of there's actual plastic integrity, and there's there are moments when any kind of thought about plastic integrity is just mocked. Mm-hmm. But that we're in territory where, do you get it? That question it comes up a lot.
Yeah, I think I understand what you mean, Jock, but I mean, you may experience yourself as just looking, but that's not really what's going on. I mean, you are familiar with the kind of language that is being offered, and so you're able to engage with it at a level of a sensuous immediacy that is not. But most people can't do that. You're not. Most people do not go to an exhibition of abstract sculpture and just look. I mean, they want to know what it means, and this kind of work is playing with that expectation of what does it mean, and that I find myself having an issue with, because the purpose for me, of what we're doing is to keep a mystery present, not to tell people what things mean.
There's a kind of a rebus built into so many of those pieces where there is something to get. So it's a kind of a puzzle, and it's a little bit tricky and a little bit obscure and maybe even a little bit obfuscated. And I think with that come all kinds of feelings of being included or left out. But I think a lot of, as you were saying about looking at abstract sculpture, it's easy by now to forget that, I mean, so many people over the last 40, 50, 60 years had that excluded, tricked out feeling about so much modern art. And so I think I don't care for that feeling myself, and I tend to kind of ignore rebuses, puzzles, when I see them. But it kind of, I think some of it comes with the territory of modernity as it's been passed to us. And those cubists, I mean, they were full of this stuff.
I'm not sure what you're saying again. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not sure I'm not sure how to kind of...
Well, there's a lot of...
I mean, the sense in which a lot of contemporary or even modern art is, what do you want to say, is relatively meaningless to a lot of people. What's the point of what do you?
And by now, I think they're kind of easy with it. They almost get a kick out of it, especially because it resembles their own world already. It seems familiar in a way, because there's so many found objects and media references and so much two-dimensional and text-based things. I mean, there's so much art that's essentially like it's a word painted into a picture. People are very comfortable with that. But the thing I was coming from is that sense that the artwork has a few identifiable, discrete items of text or significance. You call them signs that can be strung in a couple different orders and establish a kind of puzzle that can be read, or that it's deliberately unreadable, that it's deliberately frustrating if not nonsense. And that goes so far back. And the kind of humorous to mocking spectrum is also, we've inherited that each time I look back at the 20th century today, it seems like there's almost no 20th century art of any kind that isn't in some sense kind of comedic. I mean, in literature and painting and sculpture. I mean, like Brancusi, for me, it's there's so much kind of laugh out loud stuff. He almost like he won't posit anything that isn't funny. And to miss it, I think he would miss so much of what he considered essential.
I mean, how do you relate that to the Rachael Harrison exhibition? I mean, did you feel that this work was full of fun and humor, and or was it witty, or was it, I mean, what's your sense of in relation to that tradition of a kind of, rebellious, laughing, humorous?
I mean, like Brancusi's attitude to Rodin is, wow, what mockery. Acid mockery, acid sarcasm. And then he puts it into words like in sculpture, the nude bodies of men are no more handsome than toads. It's such a deliberate, wow, affront. Take that, Rodin,
I don't want to get into discussing Brancusi and Rodin, but certainly one thing about Brancusi and Rodin that's different from Harrison and Tucker. Brancusi got his hands into clay and made, sort of fake Rodins for a serious stretch of time. He didn't read books about Rodin. Mm-hmm. He made clay sculpture. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, I don't believe Rachael Harrison ever modeled clay. And not that Tucker did it much, but she never. There's a difference, and it's a difference of that. It's the difference between looking and getting it.
Well, I don't mean to argue against the difference, because that would be arguing against the identity of her work, which I wouldn't do at all. But I think that the plastic, time-taking, finding one's way plastic method is alive, operative in her work. Mm-hmm. I have the feeling that she couldn't do without it. I don't have that kind of one-liner, got it, gotcha kind of feeling that you get from some deliberately positive, in quotes, critical visual art that doesn't feel very visual and doesn't feel plastic. I wouldn't argue against like that feeling that you have that some things feel formulaic, etc. Because I know there's formulas operating here, like there is in, you could say in the work of like Tucker and Brancusi that, or Bach, that there's themes that are being, stretched and twisted and rethought and rephrased again and again. So, I don't argue with that at all. And of course there's, critiques to be made about every artist's work, good or bad, more successful or less. I don't argue against that either. But I was really very much encouraged as an artist of a different kind by how thoughtful and visual and plastic everything in this exhibition is, to greater or lesser extent.
Could you say more about? I mean, because I welcome that being pointed in that direction and to think about it in that way. Could you say more, because it to some extent that's what I was missing, was a kind of engagement with the work that involved me in some physicality, in some sensuous connection to the material stuff and to its handling and to its being pushed around and manipulated and something being made out of it. I missed it. I didn't find it. I mean, I found it occasionally here and there, like in the socks, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in that piece with the,
she had me from the
with
socks.
With the wrapping blankets, I found it, and I found it here and there. I would say it wasn't totally absent, and there was something in the graphic work where whether you can connect with the making of the thing.
Yeah.
But on the whole, I couldn't connect with the making of the thing except in terms of a this and then maybe a this, and it was a putting together of of ideas rather than bringing into being something through a process of manipulating stuff.
But we can't know how many times she pushed in and pulled out an object or another.
No, of course we can't.
Or how many times she changed the kind of the lithic lumpen matter before it got its last hit of color and seemed to be
Well, and I
fused at a
don't
moment.
think that matters. I don't think it's a matter of whether the thing has been kind of labored on. You know, it could have all been made in one gesture. If you can sense that somehow that gesture mattered, that gesture engaged something. I mean, if you go back to dance, it shouldn't be labored on. You know? So it's not. I'm not arguing that the stuff has to evidence, which it didn't. You know, but I'm not arguing that it had to evidence labor at all. You know, I mean, I think.
Yeah, but that goes back to an old coinage that the work of art ought to feel unlabored, although it doesn't always, and that the labor sometimes feels graceful and relatively easy, whether it was or not. I think that lumpen thing on that sawhorse, I thought to myself, gee, how...
The green thing.
Yeah, how much retouching does this piece need every time it's installed? Because it looks relatively fragile, like it could get a crack, it could get a scuff, and then somebody's got to do a little bit of restoration to get it back to that point of seeming like just came out of the studio, just got that coat of limeish green. And I can't tell how much labor is under that surface, but the fact that that surface is there suggests to me that a final simultaneous moment-making pass was required before the piece left the studio.
Yeah.
That she wanted a kind of effortlessness to intervene.
But I do think she spent a great deal thinking about, you know, is it going to come in here, move out there, you know, where do the legs, if it's on a sawhorse, like where exactly are they fit into the bottom of it? Is that the right place for it? Is she getting the right appearance of balance or imbalance? I mean, I think those are very deliberate decisions on her part.
Yeah. For your word deliberate, I would say calculating. You see, I mean, that was my sense. There's a calculating sense in which the things look as if they could be made by a child.
I don't get that sense that she's going for that with her sculptures.
The physical making of them is done often in a way that looks deliberately like somebody who is incompetent.
I found them to be interesting and complicated in the way that different points would move up or come out, or how they sat on an object or didn't sit flat on the floor. And I'm very curious as to what all goes on the inside of it, if it's just carved out polystyrene or if she has other things in there that she's building on. But yeah, I mean, you can call lumpen and put a bunch of colors on it, but the closer you look at it, the more interesting they are, at least to me. And I don't think, even though she was thinking about making it look like she, somebody who didn't know what they were doing, because A, I don't think someone who didn't know what they were doing could do that, and B, it just does look too deliberate. Like, she's very interested in the form.
No, I didn't say didn't know what they were doing. I think it's calculating to have a certain look.
Yeah, I mean, they definitely look like something she's done. And so, if you say formulaic, I can't really disagree with that with some of her work, but as Brandt said, like, I can also spot a Giacometti sculpture a mile away. So it's,
sorry, say again.
I mean, you can also spot a Giacometti sculpture, a figure, a mile away. So even though that's very clearly kind of her thing, I'm not sure. I mean, formulaic seems a little harsh.
Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe it is. Formulaic was a kind of, when I began to feel as on my second visit to the show and as I progressed through, there was a predictability about what I was going to experience.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily disagree with that, which is why the last room where she's drawing with the lines, I think, was so strong and surprising.
Yes.
Because she's moved off of
Yes.
whatever she was
Yes.
exploring with these to the next step.
Yes, yes, I agree, and I thought that the floor polishing mop thing in that had a kind of presence, both as a structural element,
Yeah.
the way it touched the floor and held. I thought that was beyond just what it was, which I didn't feel about the vacuum cleaner.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to come back to the calculation, that the feeling that material somehow been handled in a way that's more casual than, or naive than the artist actually is. I took that often to be calculated and to be intended toward kind of refuting or ignoring a kind of mastery that would be inappropriate or unearned, or that she meant to critique, that she didn't want the artwork to have more authority than it should have, that it shouldn't be as complete and final as it could be, as it easily could be by, asserting a mastery of like say, colors that we know will not be discordant and that will be taken seriously. Or if the lump and form is less sort of pocketed and agitated and casual, that it will read more completely and more securely than she wants. I think sometimes she wants those pieces to be as insecure as they feel. And actually that piece that's on screen, that was really very artful, the Alexander the Great, that it does have a base, and the base is a calculated, sly, posited as a sly reference to art, capital A. And that thing that it's on, in my head I compare it to the stone prow under the Nike of Samothrace. But she hasn't given it any of that kind of shapely, well-hewn, final, geometric quality. She wants it to be this sort of like swimming, pastelish mess of colors that don't fit together and that won't read as a whole. But the figure that I take is sort of riding on it. And then that papier-mâché thing has these 3 points that it sits on. So it could be tipped. And then the figure that rides it is standing on 1 foot only. And to me it had some of the magic of something like that Nike, that's riding through this unseen wind. And so I loved that. And I felt like this is making its critiques, and it's got a certain acid, it's got its sarcasm, it's like it's making small things big and bigger things small in a smart and felt way, and at the same time it's like it's continuing the crazy magic of the figure in sculpture.
Really. That's a mannequin, that figure.
Yeah.
And it's holding some can of, I forget what. It's bringing forth whatever it is that's in that can, is how I took it. I think that the connection between the sense in which the work is playing with expectations is what I found to be in the bottom line when I said calculating. That's what I had in mind. My expectations are being the sense in which people going to an art gallery's expectations are being engaged. And maybe that's where we're at. Maybe that's what the the place we've come to is that the artist now is supposed to have a kind of connection to an audience and to work with an audience and to engage an audience and therefore to engage the audience's expectations and so on. But it all felt too much like going to a shopping mall somehow, you know.
I think that's really
interesting.
interesting.
The question was, am I going to buy it or not? Not literally, but metaphorically.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't buy it, but maybe that's just because I didn't want to buy it, but I did. But it was that whole, because I had that sense of what I'm being asked is, are you going to buy this or are you not going to buy it? That's because I was being asked that question, I felt I'm tired of this.
Yeah, I do think that's really interesting to think about. Is that where we are? In a neo-capitalist world, or the age of Instagram.
It is where we are.
Yeah,
it is where we are.
You have to engage people's expectations. I mean, she has a piece that was the $50 bet. That wasn't the title of it. I think the title of it was like 24 by 20 inch for CDL. Not really sure what that meant. Maybe that's why she gets the retrospective versus somebody else, because it's selfie worthy and colorful and people recognize what's in it, and they get a feeling like we're all in this together. This isn't like art with a capital A. This is things you recognize in a museum. I don't know. I think it's a really interesting question that you're asking. I mean, we know the answer that this is where we are, but in what capacity and what does that mean? What does it mean going forward?
Well, I mean, there are alternatives.
And if you need boots on ground in a museum, what are they can only be open as long as you have visitors. Unfortunately, I mean, the government's not funding them much anymore, and you're going to need donors, but you have to keep the donors engaged as well. It's a capitalism world.
Garth, I have the feeling that that feeling that you took away is a legitimate, serious, and how to put this. That was.
I hate what's coming.
No, that was a perfectly good way to take the thrust of the whole exhibition, because I mean, so it succeeds in the sense of, like Stendhal said, the novel is a mirror going down a road, and you see the sky and you see the mud, and I think, okay, yeah, it succeeded in that sense, and man, I don't like this landscape. And I get the feeling like that's kind of what you were taking away.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think this was good work in all those senses, but I also like this neo-capitalist consumer post-factual thing. I think it's a shit. And I guess I appreciate this art for putting that well, but it's not like I like what the mirror saw.
Well, I mean, but isn't it exactly embracing the whole sense in which, in order to get on, you have to go along to get on. You need to kind of play the game, as it were.
Yeah. I just
Go along, get along.
want to bring Tina Falant back into this. She had her birthday party with the slaps, and that's sort of a funny story and whatnot, but she was also a terrific dancer and part of the Mark Morris dance group, which is sort of old-fashioned dancing to music. Everything has something to do with neo-capitalism or whatever, but they're sort of what's important about Tina Falant was her dancing, and it's old-fashioned dancing that, at least in the dance world, is able to assert itself in a way that old-fashioned drawing, painting, and sculpture is having trouble at the moment in the art world.
But those drawings in this exhibition, that's the old-fashioned thing, like
No, it's not.
going strong, I think. Ooh, we should go back together
Yeah, sure.
with a Picasso book.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, she's the first person who actually like looked through that suite, got it, used it. She's the first person who took the next step. Not what's his name? That stuff that's uptown. George Condo.
Oh, okay. Well, I go along with you there.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I did feel that in those drawings, I did feel there was some bite. You know, I did feel, you know, there was beginning to be some nastiness there. You know, which, you know, I thought was supposed to be throughout the exhibition, but I didn't feel it. There wasn't the nastiness that I would have liked to have found. But I did think there was beginning to be in some of those drawings some real kind of, some bite.
Real mess.
No,
Until,
no.
you know, she could draw when in the last room and sort of the first room. That was drawing. That, or, you know.
Yeah. No, there were some things to engage me, certainly the socks and so one or two other things, and you know, and bits of things here and there, but
Picasso was watching a lot of TV at that time too.
yeah.
While he was working at the TV, it's like from here to there. Yeah. Dirty little secret.
Well, yeah, de Kooning did the same thing. You know, watching, you know, drawing while watching TV.
Yeah, without looking down.
Sorry?
Without looking down.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And put a de Kooning beside. You know, de Kooning, the lines stay on the page.
Oh, yeah. Then I got you.
And they just slip off the page with. At least at one point, all of the sort of figures in the center of that circle in the big room, they were sort of shown individually. I'm not sure about the details, but they certainly were made individually. And then and could have been presented, you know, here is my sort of perfect sculpture. But instead of doing that, she took a bunch of things, you know, and just sort of stuffed them in the middle. That undercuts their the sense of dominating or whatever, and in an interesting sort of conversational way rather than authoritarian sort of I'm the sculptor. And
I thought it amongst other things referenced to kind of storage. Where a lot of museums have a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And those things were in a sense like in storage.
Yeah.
Along with a whole bunch of pedestals that they were, you know, randomly stacked on.
Yeah.
I looked for and failed to kind of find some coherence in the totality.
Yeah.
I couldn't sense
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Nor and the circle I didn't believe.
Yeah, I mean, because the circle could have made the whole thing into some monument, you know, of some sort. It didn't. If that was the intention, it didn't gel for me.
Right. And the Sarah C. show, you know, her rectangles did have for me anyway, a sense of discovery, and she believed in them. Mm-hmm. I sort of don't believe that Rachael Harrison believed in that circle. Though she did, I got the feeling she believed in the chairs around the meeting table in the conference room and in the photograph in the catalog. You know,
yeah, I wanted the chairs to face inward.
Yeah, sure. And I think she is, you know, trying to gain not just with the film world or whatever, but with everybody in the whole world that we live in, not just not just the art world, whatever that is.
I think you're being very, very generous, John.
Well, yeah.
I think she's very much, engaged in a New York elite world.
Well,
A
yeah.
New York elite art world.
I certainly think that that's true, but I think she's trying to get out. Or, I think she's a healthy.
I
Yeah.
don't think she is at all.
Well, yeah, and I don't have no idea. Certainly, the art world itself is trying to keep her in, or I would say. But the
I think she knows she's on the blue chip track, but that kind of calculated contingency and that certain, sarcastic slant, I think, is directed. It seems obvious to me now. It's like the target there, I think, is it's kind of the minimalists, those big male, Big Ten minimalist artists who are so very conscious of their irrefutability. And she's deliberately, one of like a number of artists is deliberately making something that's got a refutable element, that they won't go down that road, and however much authority and privilege they acquire in the art world, they really do have some plastic critical stance toward it. It's critical and plastic.
That's an interesting. That's part of the canon that she's obviously playing with.
As does Rosemary Truckle too.
Well, and coming out of Jessica Stockholder and whoever else, But I where again, the Big Ten, who I name who you want, but there is, there's a concern there for both a physical and an intellectual precision, and this is clearly, I think, proposing there can be no such thing, or such a thing is somehow or other territory to be avoided.
And to be treated with a certain skepticism.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I think that precision of minimalism is artistic, and it's sort of so-called and fictive, and at the same time I blame him for it. It's such bullshit.
What's bullshit?
That pose of the minimalists, their irrefutability, their universality, their permanence, their absolutism. What a raft of shit. I do blame him for it. Jacques, the Big Ten, which they named themselves.
Did they really?
Yeah. They had a meeting and created something they were going to call the Big Ten. I don't think
Lords
it really
of the
got out.
Universe. Yeah, they should be viewed with a little bit of skepticism.
I appreciate it artistically, kind of intellectually, and at the same time, they were just, that bubble needed bursting.
You see, what I agree with I essentially agree with what Rachael and you, Brandt, said. On the other hand, I do want to raise a flag for conviction.
Uh-huh.
I do think there is something to be said for people who have conviction.
Mm-hmm. Like I'm really like unfound object guy, and for me it's like I could never make anything that needs so much conservation and that needs a cord and a power source. It just seems so fragile and
I agree.
But apart from that, it's like when I look at a lot of contemporary art that depends on reference, and that often, kind of in some way photocopies other people's work and depends on it. My feeling is like, you live once, stand up, say what you think. Leave this other stuff out. You stand up, tell me what you think. Let me see what you have to say. And that's like a conviction issue.
Yeah, I agree. And obviously, I agree with Rachael when it becomes dogmatism, when it becomes intolerance, it's slipped over into something else.
And those minimalists were totally intolerant of the generation that followed them. God, how they hated them. But that goes on all the time, too.
So, any last words?
Other than I'll go see it a fourth time.
Yeah, I'm going back. I'm sort of bad-mouthing it a lot, but it's sort of taken me out of my little world, and I have all kinds of reservations, but I had more fun yesterday at the show than I had at the previous times, and I appreciate Rachael.
My enthusiasm.
Yes, right.
I do love this show, but I found what you all said about it, some of the criticism, to be very interesting, and I want to go back and revisit some of those as well. But I'll still be enthusiastic.
Good.